I was in a recovery room 3 days after my hip replacement when I opened my banking app to pay the hospital's supplemental invoice and saw $11,000 gone from the account I'd built for exactly this kind of trouble. I called my daughter and asked her, "Did you use my card to buy a boat?" She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Dad, you weren't using that money. Kyle's family has been so good to us. It's just a boat." I lay there in that narrow bed with a fresh titanium joint and a morphine drip and realized the daughter I had raised alone for 18 years might have been circling me the way a buzzard circles, something that's already stopped moving. Before I go further, I want to say thank you for being here. Tell me where you're listening from, friend, city and state. I read every one of them. And I'll say what I always say, some details in this story have been changed to protect the people in it, but the truth underneath it is exactly as real as it feels. My name is Walter Doss. I'm 68 years old, and until 11 days ago, I lived alone in a two-bedroom rancher on Birchwood Lane in a town outside Dayton, Ohio, that most people have never heard of and that suited me fine. I built that house with my own hands in 1987, back when my back could still take a full day of framing without complaint, back when my wife Carol was still alive to hand me nails from a coffee can and tell me I was hanging the porch swing crooked. She was right. It's still crooked. I never fixed it because fixing it felt like erasing her handwriting. Carol died 9 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the fast kind, the kind that gives you 6 weeks to make peace with 40 years of marriage ending. I made my peace as best a man can. What I didn't expect was how loud a house gets when it's quiet. I learned to set the table for one without thinking about it. I learned which floorboard by the hallway closet creaks so I could stop stepping on it in the middle of the night. Not that there was anyone left to wake. I learned that grief doesn't leave, it just learns to sit in a different chair. I have one daughter, Denise. She's 44 now, though in my head she's still 9 years old, riding her bike down Birchwood Lane with her arms out like wings, screaming at me to watch. "Daddy, watch." I raised her mostly by myself after her mother, my first wife. Sandra left when Denise was 4 and never came back around in any way that counted. I worked second shift at the transmission plant for 26 years, so I could be home in the mornings to get her to school, and I never once complained about it in front of her, because a father complaining about the thing he chose isn't a father, he's just a man looking for credit. Denise married a fellow named Kyle Brannigan about 6 years ago. Kyle sells commercial insurance, the kind of job where a man wears a blazer to a Tuesday lunch and calls it networking. He's not a bad man, exactly. Not cruel in the way you'd recognize from the outside. He's the kind of man who's pleasant right up until pleasant stops being useful to him. Denise and Kyle live about 40 minutes from me in a newer development with a homeowners association and a mailbox that matches every other mailbox on the street. We talk on the phone most Sundays. It's not that we're distant. It's that the distance had become so ordinary neither of us noticed it, the way you stop noticing a hum in the house until the refrigerator finally shuts off and the silence surprises you. 3 months before the surgery, my hip had gotten bad enough that I was using a cane just to get the mail. That's when Denise called me on a Thursday morning, which she never did. Thursday mornings were for her book club. Her voice had a warmth to it I wasn't used to hearing directed at me, the kind of warmth the salesman uses right before he tells you about a limited-time offer. "Dad," she said, "Kyle and I have been talking. We think you shouldn't be out there alone with the hip getting worse. We want to move in with you for a while, help you through the surgery and the recovery. I'll admit something to you, friend. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening, my chest did something it hadn't done in 9 years. It lifted. I had spent so long being the man who managed alone that the idea of my daughter wanting to take care of me, instead of the other way around, felt like a gift I hadn't let myself hope for. I said yes before she finished the sentence. They moved into my guest room and the room that used to be Carol's sewing room 2 weeks later. I should tell you that I have money, more than Denise ever knew, because I never talk about money. My father taught me that talking about what you have invites people to start wanting it. I'd worked that plant floor for 26 years, taken every overtime shift they offered, put money into a modest but steady portfolio. A financial advisor named Ruth Calloway helped me build after Carol passed, because Ruth told me grief money spent wisely becomes security, and grief money spent carelessly becomes regret with interest. I had close to $400,000 sitting across 2 accounts. one of them earmarked specifically for medical costs. As I got older, because I had watched Carol's final months eat through savings like a wildfire, and I swore I would never leave that burden on Denise. The first week, having them there felt like sunlight coming back into a house. Kyle grilled on Saturday. Denise reorganized my spice cabinet without asking, which irritated me for about a day and then didn't matter. I told myself the quiet had just been waiting for someone to fill it, and my daughter had finally come home to do it. The second week, small things started happening that I noticed and set aside. The way you notice a hairline crack in a foundation and tell yourself it's probably nothing. Kyle asked, very casually, over dinner, whether I still used the old family laptop or if I'd switched everything to my phone. I said phone. Mostly. He nodded like the answer mattered more than it should have. Denise offered, more than once, to help organize the bills. Since I still paid everything the old way, checks and paper statements in a green accordion folder Carol had bought decades ago. I told her I appreciated it, but I knew where everything was. She smiled and dropped it, the way you drop something you intend to pick back up later when nobody's watching. Then, about 10 days in, Kyle asked to borrow my truck to pick up a part for the water heater, since he was headed out anyway. He lifted the keys off the hook by the door before I'd finished saying yes. I watched from the kitchen window as he backed my old Silverado out of the driveway, and instead of turning left toward the hardware store, he turned right and parked at the end of the block. I could see him through the windshield from that distance, phone against his ear, talking with his free hand, moving the way a man's hand moves when he's convincing somebody of something. He sat there for near 20 minutes before he finally drove off toward town. My stomach turned over slow, like an engine that doesn't want to catch on a cold morning. I didn't say anything. I want you to understand that about me, friend. I have never in my life been a man who confronts before he's certain. My own father used to say a man who accuses without proof just teaches the guilty party to hide better. So instead of asking, I started watching. Quietly. The way I used to watch a transmission on the line for the one bad seal hiding among 40 good ones. I started checking my bank statements every morning instead of once a month. Small charges began appearing that I didn't recognize. $60 here, $90 there, $140 for something labeled only with a merchant code I didn't understand. None of them were large enough on their own to alarm a man who wasn't looking closely. That was the point, I think. Small amounts, spread thin, the kind of theft that survives on a victim's trust and a victim's exhaustion. Then came the night I wasn't supposed to hear anything. I'd gone to bed around 9, the hip aching the way it always did before rain, and I got up around midnight for water, moving slow and quiet on account of the pain, my cane tapping soft against the hallway runner. I heard voices in the kitchen. Denise and Kyle, low, urgent, the particular register people use when they think a closed door and a sleeping old man make them safe. He's got almost $400,000 sitting there doing nothing, Kyle was saying. For what? He lives in a 2-bedroom rancher, drives a 15-year-old truck, doesn't take vacations. What is he even saving it for? Kyle. Denise's voice had a warning in it, but a soft one, the kind that argues with the tone and not the substance. I'm serious, Denise. He's 68 with a bad hip. Statistically, he's got, 10 years, 15 if he's lucky? We could use that money now, when it actually helps us, instead of waiting for him to die and inheriting it when we're too old to enjoy it. I stood in that dark hallway with my hand flat against the wall, and something in my chest went very still and very cold. The particular stillness of a man realizing the ground he's been standing on was never solid at all. The boat thing was smart, Kyle went on. Small enough he didn't blink. We just need to keep it under a threshold he won't notice, and eventually restructure the accounts so we don't need his signature at all. He trusts me, Denise said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't read from the hallway. Something that might have been guilt, or might have simply been satisfaction at how well the trust was working in her favor. He'll sign anything I put in front of him, if I frame it right. I did not go into that kitchen. I want to tell you I did, that I threw the door open and gave a speech that set them both straight. But that isn't the kind of man I am. And more than that, it wasn't the smart thing to do. A wounded animal that shows its wound gets finished off. I went back to bed. I did not sleep. I lay there with my hip throbbing and my mind working faster than it had in years, running numbers, running names, running through every account and every document Carol and I had ever signed. Until somewhere around 4 in the morning, I had the beginning of a plan. The next afternoon, I drove myself to see Ruth Calloway, my financial advisor, using the excuse of a follow-up appointment I invented on the spot. Ruth had managed my accounts since Carol passed and knew, better than anyone alive, exactly what I had and exactly how I wanted it protected. I told her what I'd overheard. I watched her face change from professional pleasantness into something harder, more focused. "Walter," she said, "this is elder financial exploitation. I've seen it before, more than you'd think. Family members are the most common offenders because they're the ones with access and the ones nobody suspects." She slid a legal pad across her desk. "I want you to write down everything, dates, dollar amounts, what you overheard, word for word, as best you remember it. And I'm going to give you a name. Attorney named Lewis Marsh. He specializes in exactly this. Elder law, financial abuse, conservatorship defense. You call him before you go home today." I called Louis Marsh from the parking lot of Ruth's office building, sitting in my truck with the windows up so nobody walking by could hear. His voice was calm in the particular way of a man who has heard worse stories than mine 100 times over and stopped being surprised by any of them. "Mr. Doss," he said, after I'd told him what I knew, "the good news is you caught this early, and you caught it before they had full access to your accounts. The bad news is that families like this rarely stop on their own. They usually escalate, because the first small success convinces them the plan is working. I want you to keep behaving exactly as you have been, trusting, a little slow, a little distracted by the pain from your surgery. Let them believe they're winning. In the meantime, we build the record." Over the following 2 weeks, I became, in effect, an actor in my own house. I let Denise help with the mail, watching carefully which envelopes she set aside. I let Kyle borrow the truck twice more, and both times I quietly noted the odometer before he left and after he returned, and both times the mileage matched a drive to the marina where, Louis' investigator later confirmed, they were paying down a loan on a used pontoon boat registered solely in Kyle's name. The surgery came and went. I'll spare you most of the hospital details, except to say that lying in that recovery bed, hip freshly replaced, body wrecked and slow, was when I opened the app on my phone and found the $11,000 gone a single large transfer this time, not the small drips from before. Moved from my medical account into a joint account. Denise had apparently opened using a power of attorney form I did not remember signing, though later, under Louis' investigation, we would learn precisely how that signature came to exist. That's when I called her. That's when she laughed and told me about the boat like she was explaining a coupon she'd used at the grocery store. That's when I understood, lying in that bed with tubes in my arm, that the daughter I had raised alone, the one whose bike I'd taught to balance, whose homework I'd checked at the kitchen table every night for 18 years, had been quietly deciding, for months, that my life was a countdown clock standing between her and a payout. I didn't cry in that hospital bed. I want you to know that. I had cried plenty over Carol, cried until I didn't think there was anything left in me to cry with, and I found, lying there, that there wasn't a tear left over for this. What I felt instead was a terrible clarity, the kind of clarity a man only gets a few times in his life, when every soft assumption he's built his world on gets stripped away at once, and what's left underneath is just cold, plain fact. "All right, Denise," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "All right." She must have heard something in those 2 words, because her tone shifted, just slightly, toward caution. "Dad, don't make this weird. It's just a boat." "It's just a boat," I repeated, and hung up. I called Lewis Marsh from that hospital bed. "It's time," I told him. "Move on everything." What followed over the next 6 weeks was not loud. There were no screaming matches, no thrown dishes, none of the drama you might expect from a story like this. It was paperwork. It was Lewis filing a report with Adult Protective Services and a parallel civil action for financial exploitation. It was a forensic accountant Ruth recommended tracing every transfer back to its origin, building a timeline that showed a pattern too consistent to be accidental. The small test withdrawals, the escalation, the power of attorney document that, once examined by a handwriting expert, showed clear signs of being signed under circumstances I had no memory of. Likely during a period when I was still groggy from pre-surgical sedation and Denise had, according to the hospital's own visitor log, been alone with me for 11 unsupervised minutes. I moved out of my own guest room dynamic, so to speak, without ever raising my voice. I simply stopped being the trusting man in the kitchen chair. I had the locks changed on the house while I finished recovery at a rehabilitation facility, a decision Louis insisted on for my own safety, both physical and legal. I revoked the power of attorney formally, through the court, establishing on record that it had never been validly authorized. I opened new accounts at a different bank entirely, ones Denise had never had access to, ones nobody but Ruth, Lewis, and I knew existed. Kyle called me 11 times in 4 days once he realized the accounts were frozen pending investigation. I did not answer. Denise sent messages that moved, over the course of that week, from confusion to anger to something that almost sounded like fear, and finally, on the 5th day, to something that read like an apology, though even then, reading it twice, I noticed she never used the word stole. She used the word misunderstanding. There is a moment I want to tell you about, because it's the one that stays with me most, more than the courtroom, more than any of it. About 3 weeks into all this, an old neighbor of mine, a widower named Gerald Finch, who's lived 2 houses down since before I built the place, came by the rehab facility to see me. Gerald and I aren't close, not the kind of close where men say much to each other beyond a wave from the mailbox. But he sat down in the plastic chair beside my bed and told me he'd noticed Kyle's comings and goings with my truck over the past couple months and had, on his own initiative, started keeping a log dates, times, what Kyle was carrying when he left and when he came back. He handed me 3 pages of handwritten notes in blue ink, dated and timed with the precision of a man who understood, better than most, what it means to watch out for someone without being asked. "You'd have done the same for me," Gerald said, when I tried to thank him properly. "Man doesn't watch his neighbor's back. What's the point of having one?" I sat there in that rehab bed and I cried then, finally, not over Denise, not yet, but over Gerald, over the plain, unglamorous decency of a man who owed me nothing showing up anyway. The legal process moved slower than any of us wanted, the way these things do. Louis explained that the district attorney's office was weighing whether to pursue criminal charges alongside the civil case, given the documented pattern and the questionable power of attorney signature, but that ultimately, given Denise's lack of prior record and my own reluctance to see my only child go to prison, we settled on a resolution that satisfied the law without destroying what small thread of family might still exist to rebuild someday. Though I confess I don't know if I want it rebuilt. Not yet, maybe not ever, and I've stopped pretending to myself that I know the answer to that. The settlement required full repayment of every dollar traced, with interest, a formal 5-year restraining order, preventing either Denise or Kyle from having any financial access or decision-making authority regarding my affairs, and a public record establishing exactly what had happened, in case anyone in the future needed proof that Walter Doss had not simply misplaced his own money in a fog of old age, as Kyle's attorney had, at one point, tried to suggest to the court. I sat in that courtroom in Montgomery County the day the judge, a sharp older woman named Judge Patricia Vance, who wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain and had clearly heard every version of this story 100 times before, read the terms of the settlement into the record. Denise sat at the petitioner's table in a navy blazer, her hands folded the careful way of someone performing composure rather than feeling it. She looked over at me once, and I looked back, and neither of us looked away, and I felt, in that long, silent look across a courtroom, the entire weight of 18 years of raising her alone and the 6 years since where I had let comfortable distance stand in for closeness. And I understood, finally, that both of those things, the love and the distance, had somehow made a road that led here. I want to tell you what I did after, because I think it matters more than the courtroom did. I did not cut Denise off entirely, though I revised my will, and I want to be honest with you about exactly how. I did not leave her a single dollar out of spite. Instead, I set up something Ruth and Louis helped me structure, an educational trust in Carol's name, the Carol Ann Doss Memorial Fund, that provides scholarships for kids in foster care in our county who are aging out of the system with nowhere to go and nobody watching their back the way Gerald had watched mine. I put the bulk of what remains of my savings into that fund. Denise's inheritance, when the time comes, will be a modest, fixed amount, enough to show she was not erased, not enough to reward what happened, and structured, on Lewis's advice, in a way that cannot be touched, borrowed against, or accessed early by anyone but her, under her own signature alone, verified in person, every single time. I moved back into my house on Birchwood Lane once the locks were changed and the accounts were secured. The porch swing is still crooked. I still haven't fixed it. Most mornings now, I sit out there with my coffee and watch the street the way I used to before any of this happened. And some mornings, the quiet feels peaceful again, instead of just empty, which I count as progress, slow as it's been. Denise has reached out twice since the settlement. Careful, measured messages, nothing demanding, nothing accusing, just asking how my hip is healing and whether I'm eating well. I've answered both times, short and civil, not warm, not cold. I don't know yet what kind of relationship, if any, survives what happened in that house. I think some bridges you can rebuild plank by plank, if both people are willing to do the slow, humbling work of it. And some bridges you simply learn to live on the other side of. And I haven't decided yet which kind this is. And I've stopped punishing myself for not having the answer. What I know is this. I spent 18 years teaching that girl to ride a bike, to tie her shoes, to believe that the world, despite what it took from her mother, could still be a fundamentally fair place if you worked hard and told the truth. Somewhere between then and the kitchen conversation I overheard in the middle of the night, something in that lesson got lost. Or maybe it was never fully learned. Or maybe, and this is the thought that sits heaviest with me some nights, maybe I taught her to trust the wrong things. Taught her that love was supposed to be quiet and undemanding and easy to take advantage of. Because that's the kind of love I gave her, and the kind of love I let people take from me without ever asking for anything back. I am 68 years old. I have a new hip, a crooked porch swing, a scholarship fund with my late wife's name on it that will put foster kids through community college for longer than I have left to watch it happen, and a daughter I love and do not currently trust, which is a harder thing to sit with than either loving her or being angry at her alone would be. Here is what I'll leave you with. Whoever you are, wherever you're sitting, listening to this. If somebody in your life who is supposed to protect you starts, instead, treating your vulnerability like an opportunity, you are not required to keep handing them the keys just because you love them. Love and access are two different gifts, and you are allowed to give one without giving the other. I gave both, freely, for years, and it took a stolen boat and a sleepless midnight in a dark hallway for me to learn the difference. I hope it doesn't take that much for you. I hope, if you're in a house right now where the quiet doesn't feel peaceful, where something in your gut has been humming a warning for weeks that you've been too tired or too hopeful or too lonely to listen to, that you listen to it tonight. Write things down. Watch the mileage. Trust the feeling in your stomach before you trust the smile across the dinner table. The oak trees Carol and I planted the year we moved into this house are taller than the roofline now. She always said she wanted something in this yard that would outlast the two of us, and I suppose, sitting out here most mornings with my coffee, watching them hold their leaves against whatever the season throws at them, she got exactly what she wanted. I'm still here too, crooked swing and all, still figuring out what the rest of this is for. Most days, I think I'm getting closer to an answer. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.